Ready? Yes. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming along today, this afternoon. And I'll just clear the chat pane before we get started. And I'd like to thank Gillian McNeill. Gillian McNeill is a speech and language therapist at Cole and has a wealth of experience when it comes to different access methods, switches, keyboards and eye gaze. So I'll just hand over to Gillian just now. Is that okay, Gillian?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks
and we'll come
much,
back to this section towards the end for any questions that people might have.
Yeah.
So we've got a bit of presentation, a bit of video, and then some questions and answers at the end. Is that okay?
Yep, that's right. And the video will be archived?
Yeah,
probably
it'll be
from
archived
tomorrow.
Yeah, or Friday.
So any of the links within the presentation, don't worry if you haven't had a chance to click on them as we go through. They'll all be clickable from the archive of the webinar too, Craig?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, so I'll control your presentation for you, so just tell me when you want to change the slides.
Yep, that's super. So, well, welcome everybody wherever you're from, far and wide I expect. The webinar today, we're sitting in Edinburgh, and really delighted to have you joining us today. So, just by way of introduction, some of you will be familiar with Call Scotland and others perhaps not so. We're a team of 10 staff and we have a mixed skill base, including teachers, assistive technologists and speech therapists. As Craig mentioned, my background is in speech therapy. Very much I'm a practitioner. So what I'll be sharing with you today regarding selecting an access method for those you're working with it's very much based on the information that I've gathered through my work here at Call, working with individuals with disabilities. And the purpose of the service that we deliver at Call is to help children and young people across Scotland to overcome disability and barriers to learning through assistive technology. So we do deliver this through our assessment service of individual learners and primarily are supporting them to access the curriculum and to support their communication. And although our work is very much in the context of schools and learners, I'm really hoping that the information shared today will be applicable much more broadly, because I appreciate those joining the webinar are likely to be working in different contexts. So if you'd like to find out a wee bit more about Call and access to a host of other information, resources, and of course other webinars, please do follow or have a look at our website. We've got a wee quick look there, Craig. But also follow us on Twitter. So GX McNeill is my Twitter handle, and also the general Call Scotland Twitter account too. And I should mention that we're on Facebook. So right up there with our social networking. So today we're going to cover three, or approach the topic from 3 points. The first being a quick look at options for people with physical difficulties to access and control a computer or communication aid, and recognising that access technologies are a crucial component of assistive technology to enable people with physical difficulties really to access many aspects of their daily life. There is quite a wealth of information on technologies on the internet and elsewhere. So although we are going to look at this briefly, what I'm going to maybe spend a bit more time on is the topic of tools for assessment, because it can be a bit trickier really finding appropriate tools for this. So I'm going to share some that we've found useful and would recommend, and then finally some further sources of information so that you can go and explore them in a bit more depth. I'll hopefully not slip into terminology too much with the webinar. Assistive technology, the broad term, I might refer to AAC, which of course is my area really in particular of expertise, which is the communications of technology side of things, AAC being the term to describe various methods of communication that can help people who are unable to use verbal speech to communicate. And thanks, Craig. We're on the next.
Too quick, sorry.
A wee bitty. But before looking at the technology, what I thought it would be useful to do is just to think about the sort of context in which the access technology fits. And I found this model useful, and I hope that you do too. The model's been shared by my colleague Paul Nisbet, who has got considerable knowledge in this area of assistive technology, and particularly access, and so he's quite happy for me to share it with you. And really the purpose of it is to show that you can't really think about access technology in isolation. It's part of a much bigger system, as you can see, which includes the user, then the access technology that we're focusing on today, but then the device, of course, that the technology is being used to control, and finally the functional activity that they are wishing to carry out, and of course the environment actually as well, in which it's taking place. So all these aspects must be taken into account when considering what access technology to use with an individual. So just going through one or two of these in a wee bit, or picking up a wee bit more on them. So the control site, the user's control site, the particular body part or physical action that the user employs to operate the technology, can be finger, hand, foot, knee, elbow, mouth, head, eyes, and of course actually also voice. Probably the most, I'd be correct in saying the most common control site is usually the hand, finger or thumb, and often that is used to access touchscreen, keyboard, mouse or trackpad. Although we recognise that there are many other ways that access methods can be accessed, and of course I mentioned voice too in terms of voice recognition. So the control interface consists of the actual input device, so the switch or the joystick itself, or an eye gaze camera, for example, and that provides the means for the user to actually interact with the device. But then also there is the control interface. So this is the what the user uses to actually control their device. It's typically software. It could be adjustments, simple adjustments to the operating system, and really the optimum kind of nature and design of this control interface has to reflect the skills and preferences very much of the user. So as I mentioned, it could be just simple adjustments to the existing operating system. It could be, or typically often is specialist software, for example, to allow switch scanning or to allow eye gaze. In terms of the devices, often mainstream devices, but for others much more bespoke communication devices, for example, and for control of environments, and also devices to allow for powered wheelchair for mobility. And of course the functional activities vary greatly depending on what users are wishing to do, so far as work, learn, communicate with others through social media or face-to-face as control environment, or for personal mobility. So this particular model, if you just move on now, Craig, is actually also part of or included in this book, which I thought I would mention at this point in the webinar. A relatively recent text that is available. It is, I would say, a very comprehensive and lengthy text for people that are looking for information on assistive technology in particular detail. Available from Amazon. For those that are university-based, it ought to be available without cost from the Signed Direct link on the slide. So it's very much comprehensive coverage of electronic assistive devices, and an overview of different physical and cognitive difficulties, and how assistive devices can be used to support them. So I'll mention one or two other resources in the webinar. If you feel that this is not kind of applicable to you, there are one or two others that might be. So Craig, moving on to have a look at the input or various input devices, which is obviously there's many of them, and I've just selected a small selection here to highlight today. Different access devices, such as simple adapted keyboards, easy to plug in and plug and go type keyboards, or perhaps just a simple key guard, which of course can go on some of these keyboards themselves, or might be a key guard to go onto a communication device, such as an iPad with a communication app. But of course, physical pointing devices to allow access, such as the ball stylus that I've got on the PowerPoint slide there, and the headset, of course, which is a useful tool when using voice recognition software. And finally, just a selection of switches. Of course, there really are hundreds and hundreds of these, but just a few example switches to give people a flavour of the types of switches that you might find. The number one, the button switch, which commonly is used, the jelly bean being the one that we often use. Number two, a PAL pad switch, which requires very light touch and doesn't have any sort of audio feedback. Number three is a mouth controlled suck puff switch. Number four, a proximity switch, where no pressure is required at all. You just have to have your hand or other body part in close proximity to the switch to activate it. Number five at the top, a wobble switch, which again can often used with maybe the swipe of an arm. And number six is a fairly sophisticated track-it switch, which simulates mouse movements with a single switch. So more or less all of these switches, of course, do require a switch interface with your computer sort of technology to allow the control. So just I see a selection there. And moving on, Craig, to some other input devices. There's a range of different mouse alternatives. Ergonomic mouse, or the picture on the top right, the Kuha Zono, which is a gyroscopic mouse. You can see it on a headset in this particular case. But also lots and lots of different joystick and rollerball kind of options. There's a Kid Track and the Big Point. Kid Track rollerball and the Big Point joystick on the slide there. Head pointers, which used with quite a few different pupils and clients over the years, and that's the Smart Nav, or Natural Point as it's referred to on the screen, which requires head movements as opposed to not to be confused with eye movements. And of course, eye gaze being one of the more recent access technologies that lots and lots of people are using now. I was trying to think if I'd missed anything.
If you have any others, please pop them into the pane once we've come back to it.
But
quite useful.
Hopefully that's a relatively comprehensive run through of the different input methods. So moving on to interfaces and what they might look like. Various on-screen keyboards, and I've got the Super Keys keyboard up there, which is a two-hit keyboard, so far as selecting a group, and then the group enlarging to allow a larger target area to select the letter. Also other options, as I mentioned, the accessibility, built-in accessibility features, and there's more and more of these coming, particularly within the Apple iOS on iPads. There's just one or two shown in the screenshot there, but more and more accessibility options coming within Windows themselves, and Craig's actually the expert on that with Windows 13 and accessibility. So we'll not go into that for now, but it's good to see them coming in without specialist software being needed. But finally, mentioning specialist software, the final graphic there on the slide is a screenshot of the Grid 3, and this is a bit of software that we use with a lot of our pupils, so far as computer control and also communication. And this is set up actually for one of our pupils to use eye gaze to jump into these particular functions within their eye gaze system. However, having shown you some of these visual interfaces, they don't have to be visual, they often are, but they may be audible, so far as screen reader software for those with perhaps a visual impairment, as well as auditory scanning, which is a method that we use within the communication devices, sometimes to help with the navigation through that. And of course, what I haven't mentioned just as yet is switch and switch scanning software. Perhaps a bit of a trend at the moment away from using switches because of a perception that it is a much slower method of access, and this is partly actually the reason for doing the webinar today, was to kind of remind ourselves and to highlight the fact that switch scanning can still be, or certainly the accuracy and efficiency of it can be increased quite considerably with the use of different features and options within switch scanning software. So it's certainly worthwhile sort of considering that before perhaps jumping to some of the other access sort of methods. So what I'd like to do is just actually to show you a quick video, if we've got time for that, Craig.
Yeah.
Which I've actually, it's not one of ours, it's from Bristol NHS Trust, just to demonstrate switch scanning, because it's quite a difficult access method to actually describe. So just a couple of short clips.
For the right individual, switch scanning is a simple yet highly effective way of navigating your chosen communication program. This access method is achieved by means of gross or fine body movement, where the pressing of a switch controls selections. The individual hits the switch when the target item is highlighted on screen. Switches can also come in a variety of forms and sizes. They cater for different body movements, such as pressing the switch with the hand or the head.
And now just I'll look at the actual a particular scanning system and how it works. I think it's a typical row column scan. That's at 133, Craig. I'm not sure if that's actually... Oh, there we go.
In terms of scan type, a number of options are available. One example is row column scanning, where pressing the switch will start the automatic scan down the rows. Whilst another press will cause the scan to filter along the cells of a selected row, a final press will select the desired letter or item. To counteract time delays that may be encountered in waiting for the scan to get across to a desired item, speed can be increased. Functions such as reverse or cancel can also be added in case of an error or a missing desired item. Programming predictive word choices and saved phrases can also be a helpful aid.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Yep, so lots of different ways that switch scanning can be set up to improve the speed of output from using switches. And if you want to have a look at that video in its entirety, we'll share a link certainly for that. It's from the North Bristol NHS Trust, so thanks to them for their nice straightforward video. So moving on to assessment now, and how important it is that this is approached from the point of view of the team. There are so many different skills to assess when matching the user to their access method, and really important to include specialists in educational needs if it's a learner in school, and other information technology specialists. And of course, because we're thinking about physical skill here, OTs and physios, as well as bioengineering and technical services for building and adapting control devices, if it's regarding communication, including speech therapists to advise on setup of the communication device too, and of course thinking about sensory needs involving visual and hearing impairment specialists, and I'm sure there are others too that would be important to input into that assessment. So regarding approaches, assessment approaches, there's a few different ways that this can be done. I like simple and straightforward, and so I was having a dig to see what I could find regarding sort of simple approaches. This simple decision tree, or I find anyway, simple pathways or decision trees are often very, very useful. And this one is actually taken from the book Special Access Technology that my colleague Paul was involved in writing quite a number of years ago. In fact, about 25 years ago. But he was saying a lot of the content of it, the principles are still relevant. It's free to download, and the link's on the slide there. But as you'll see, there's a wee bit of a pathway to follow to help in the decision making regarding what skills the user has, and then what access technologies to try out. I've split it actually over 2 slides just so that it might be possible for you to read. So the next one, thanks Craig, takes you, as you can see, to often switch access being your, suggest it might be your last option to consider. I'd like to see that but maybe a bit further up the tree. And given the timing of this, eye gaze was not an option, so I've added in the question about whether the user can track items on a screen with their eyes, and if that is the case, then eye gaze access may well be an option to try. So from simple trees such as this to other tools, perhaps exploring access methods in a bit more detail. And the next 3 slides I've taken from tools from the Tobii Dynavox site. Tobii Dynavox are suppliers of the eye gaze camera or eye gaze cameras, as well as communication devices. And these are nice, simple tools. The top link is where the range of tools are available, and the bottom link is actually the link to this particular assessment screening tool. As I mentioned, it's very straightforward, and there are, it explores some are suggested activities to help you select access technologies. There are suggested activities for investigating touch as an access method, for exploring mouse control, for exploring head control, as in a head pointer, and also for exploring eye tracking, as in eye gaze access. For example, if you're looking at direct access, it advises on assessing whether an individual can target a particular area on a screen and presenting them with images of smaller size to see the size of the item that they can actually access on a screen. So it's really nice kind of practical sort of activities for helping you to select or that particular input device. A couple of others. There's a direct selection checklist, so if you want to look at direct selection in a bit more detail, this particular checklist allows you to record your assessment, to record items such as the body part used, whether it's right and left hand or arm, etc., the movements that a user is using, whether they're doing it independently or with some support or prompting, adaptive equipment and positioning such as mounting, etc., and the positioning that the individual themselves is in when using the access method, as well as timings and sort of other options. So a nice useful checklist, and there's a similar one regarding scanning, really looking at different scanning options and which methods used, etc. So moving swiftly on, the final tool I want to share with you is from our colleagues at the A Centre, and this is a tool which has been around for quite some time. I believe that they are, aspects of it are a wee bit outdated, but they are looking at a new resource. But this is a really useful guide when considering different access methods. There's a pre-assessment screen where the needs of the individual and the goals for their access is considered. A list of, or an option to add in a list of the equipment that they're using, sensory abilities they have, and their physical abilities. And then it goes on to an assessment form where you can record the switches that are trialled and how they're set up and used, and finally an action plan. So I really like this tool. I think potentially really quite useful. So another, in terms of further information then, and other resources for people to find out a bit more about assessment and this topic in general. The first is a link to some online learning. Again, it is focused on AEC, but a lot of this is applicable really regardless of what you're using the access method for. And if you'd like to see some access methods kind of in use, then there's some nice videos and photographs, etc., to sort of put it into the context. The first module very much looks at introduction to assessment and different approaches to assessment. And the second, there's two modules. The second module looks at identifying needs, and in the chapter 5 of this in particular looks at access methods and, as I say, user examples. Next slide then, Craig, thanks. Yep. So here's an example of some access methods. And actually what I failed to mention with the previous slide was mounting options for switches and devices. So I think there was a few graphics showing some mounting options on that. So we're more or less there, I think. Last slide then, Craig. Yep. So a few more useful links for you. QIAT, which is Quality Indicators for Assistive Technology, is a very comprehensive and useful website and forum for questions, and a really useful place to explore this area of access technologies, as well as the SetBC website, which we use their framework a lot. A book that is referred to a lot, the Assistive Technologies book by Albert Cook. And of course, not forgetting our own website for further information, and the Communication Matters website, which is the UK organisation that promotes AEC, has lots of further information on assessments and also suppliers of the technologies. So,
okay, thanks,
yep,
Gillian. That was
overrun
very interesting.
very slightly, but
it's a complicated business. It's not
yeah,
straightforward, is it?
Exactly.
There's lots to think about. So
Yep.
it's really good having all these tools and resources that you can use. Actually, just out of interest, so just maybe a show of hands or yes or no into the text box. How many people who are here today are actually supporting people with, sort of alternative access methods, such as the things that Gillian's just covered? Val is, yes. Heather. Okay, so quite a lot of you are
well,
involved.
that's great.
Yeah,
Good. Yeah.
Okay, is there anything maybe Gillian has maybe has missed, or something you maybe like to add, or something you've got an experience that you're using you'd maybe like to just share with everyone? Or if you have any questions as well for Gillian too, that would be quite useful. Feel free just to type them into the chat box below. So Casey and Leanne. Yes, so we're recording the webinar, and we can make that'll be available for you to look at.
Yeah, it certainly will be on the website.
Yeah, so it'll
from
be on
tomorrow, I expect.
Yeah.
And I believe there'll be a link emailed
Yeah,
out.
if you
most
give me a
likely tomorrow
second,
as well.
I'll
Would that
just
be
show
right?
you where the so go
In the training section. Yeah.
I'll just
Webinars.
right. So I'll pop this into the. So if we go down here, pop that in. So if you go there, probably Friday or Monday, it will be there as an archive. It's on the. If you scroll down towards the bottom right hand side, it'll be there. Casey, can you use two types? Can you use eye gaze and a head switch, or is it just better to use one?
You can use eye gaze and a separate switch. I would say that using eye gaze with a head switch is particularly difficult because it does require you to take your eyes away to operate the head switch. I have seen eye gaze used along with, say, somebody who's using a hand switch, but it's quite challenging because, as I say, often the focus of attention to use a switch is taken away from you watching the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite a challenge, but it can be very, very quick. You can, as an access method, it can be very, very quick. So rather than using, say, the dwell, which is where your eyes rest on an area of the screen for a short time to make the selection, it is possible to plug in an external switch and just be looking at the area of the screen and then pressing the switch to select it.
Val makes an interesting observation about resources for materials for switch access. Yeah. Obviously, Ian Beans is a really good too, but I'm also thinking oneswitch.com is another one, but that tends to be, or oneswitch.org. That's more for games resources.
Yeah.
Inclusive, all their resources which are paid for.
Yes,
as well.
yes. Although there are some that you can access free, but think of Help Kids Learn, which has got a subscription. Yeah. A lot of their apps, but yes, that's probably warrants another webinar, doesn't it? Looking at the actual software for switch and scanning. I'm thinking on the website whether there might be some information. on that.
We certainly got references to Ian's roadmap.
That's right, the switch progression
yeah.
roadmap. Yeah.
Just let Karen type in, and I think we'll close up because we're well over our time. But thank you everyone for coming along today and for asking the questions as well. So Karen, so you think it's quite good value for money for having a subscription with Help Kids Learn?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably agree with that actually. It's good.
Yeah. I'm thinking Tar Heel Reader is another source of materials for Switch. It's very much books of PowerPoint type books.
Yeah, Tar Heel Reader
yeah.
is one. Val is typing. Maybe Val has one that's some resources that she knows of. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming along today, and thank you to Gillian as well for a very interesting session. Yeah, it's just that point that Val makes about, from cause and effects to other more sort of advanced things, or even from maybe one switch to two switches, or that sort of thing as well, or and even just cause and effect from one switch moving on to whatever the program is with two switches. It's a lot to think about, isn't it?
Yeah. We'll bear that in mind, Val.
Yeah. Yes, Doorway Online is Switch
Another
accessible
webinar.
as well. Good one to remember. Doorway Online Switch accessible.
Yes.
Well done for Phil for doing that. Okay, right. Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone. Thanks Val for your suggestions, and thanks to everyone for taking part, and thanks to Gillian for hosting it today. Okay, thanks everyone.
Yep,
See
thanks,
you.
then.
Just close down now.
Bye for now.
Stop the recording. Thanks. Bye. Thank you.